people are joining. YouTube is starting. And hello, welcome to the Yaesu Fusion webinar. Your panelist for this webinar is John Crook in 9UPC. Please use the Q&A function to post your questions. They will be answered at the end of the presentation. After the webinar is closed and we don't get to your question, John will provide an email address to contact if you have more questions. This webinar is also being live streamed on YouTube and is being recorded for later viewing. You can find information to access those videos on www.hamcation.com. So you know your camera does not need to be on and your microphone has been muted. If there's a special need, we can turn your microphone on temporarily. Also be aware there's a strict time limit for this webinar. Thanks, and with that, here's John.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. John Crook, N9UPC. I'm the National Sales Manager, Fusion Specialist for Yaesu, and I'd like to go ahead and first of all, of course, say thank you to Hamcation for allowing me to present not only yesterday, but also to present today. So today's content, yesterday we talked about HF and stuff. Now today we're going to hop in and we're going to talk about Fusion, kind of understanding the aspects of Fusion. Now, one of the things I did find out is that each year, from time to time, you know, we try to, you know, find out what people want, what are the core content of what's going on with Fusion. And one of the things that I noticed, especially last year, but more so this year, more than ever, is that we started to come into an aspect of saying, you know what, Fusion has been out there long enough that there is now actually a kind of a new birth of new Fusion users. And so when we take a look at like what content we're going to present in bigger forums like this, we kind of say, okay, what can we do? How can we, you know, kind of answer all these questions? So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And for today, we're going to do our Fusion presentation, which is basically kind of a, did you know? And what we wanted to do is we wanted to say, and we know that there are basically 3 levels of Fusion users out there. We have your beginner levels. These are you out there who have said, okay, hey, here's the deal. I want a Fusion radio. I want to be able to use it. I'm new to it. I don't know what it is. I know what Fusion has, all this kind of stuff like that. So, hey, what can I do? And what I said was, okay, let's break it down, because there's beginner level users, there's intermediate level users, and then there's advanced level users on there. So and if I keep looking down, apologize, I'm powering up the PowerPoint here. But so Fusion actually started back in 2013. Now, what was unique about that time in Fusion was it was a concept, it was an idea. And actually, if you want to dip into things, Fusion actually came about and was actually thought of more so in 2010. All righty. But what happened was when it was birthed in 2010, we took a look at it. We said, what do we want to do? How do we want to go with it? You know, what exactly happens? Well, 2013 came around towards the end, and we announced that we had a new handheld radio. We had a new mobile radio. Now, the handheld radio is kind of built off of the very successful, very popular VX8 series platform on there. So what happened was we said, okay, what are we going to do? What do we want to do? Well, we want to build a radio that could be used for our new digital voice technology. And we came out with that model that was called the FT1D. Now, what ended up happening from there is that we went along and progressed it more to the point of saying, okay, we need to come out with a mobile on there. And that was when we came out with the FTM 400D. Well, as time went on and time kind of progressed, we did upgrade those models even. You may remember there was the XD series of both of those radios there where we improved GPS and a few other things on there. But what the Fusion protocol embraced, and still embraces to this day, is the usage of C4FM and FDMA technology. Now, a lot of people have always questioned, a lot of people have always asked, why do we use C4FM? Why do we use FDMA? Well, we use C4FM because C4FM was being proven for usage in other critical digital voice environments. And primarily the one you're going to go ahead and think of, and a lot of people do, is APCO 25, which is a standard created for public safety usage. That uses C4FM. APCO 25 created the format protocol. Okay, they use C4FM, they use FDMA, they call it P25, just like we call it Yaesu System Fusion. Okay, but getting back to the core concept of it, we had specific reasons why we wanted to use C4FM. And then in addition, we used a specific reason why we used FDMA technology. FDMA, excuse me, technology offers a more easier way to be able to have the transmitter operate as compared to sort of say TDMA technologies. So with those two things together, we came up with 3 of the main core principles for fusion. Alrighty. So the first one, it needed to be easy. It needed to be easy, super easy, super simple. You've heard me say this. All you do is enter your call sign, you select the mode, and go. That's it. That's all you have to do. You don't have to worry about talk groups. You don't have to worry about time slots. You don't have to worry about NAC codes or color codes or RAN codes or call sign routing and all this kind of stuff like that. No, you don't have to worry about it. Fusion is, for the most part, just like you would operate an analog radio. You pick it up. Once again, you turn on your radio for the first time. If you own a Fusion radio, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you that don't, once again, you simply turn it on. It will say enter your call sign. You enter your call sign, and that's it. The next thing you want to do is if you want to talk with your operation, you simply change the mode from FM to either DN or VW mode. DN is digital narrow, VW is voice wide mode. Okay. So that was it. That's simple and easy. The other thing is it had to be high quality digital voice. Okay. If you have digital voice, it's great and everything, but if it's not high quality, if you can't understand it, it really defeats the purpose of digital voice. If we really think about it, it does. No sense in going ahead and having any sort of usage of digital voice if analog sounds better. If I'm having a hard time hearing a digital voice transmission, it's not worth it. And then the next biggest thing, which kind of came into how we envision our product line, is flexibility and versatility in operation. We wanted it to be something where you don't have to, you're not restricted. You're not saying, I need the internet for this to work. I need to be connected to this. I need to have this set up. No, we wanted Fusion to be like your analog operation is. Hey, if you have an analog repeater, you want to throw it on top of a hill, you can throw it on top of a hill. Same thing with Fusion. You don't need internet. You don't need any things like that. Now, don't get me wrong, there is the functionality, there is the option to add in certain things to improve a Fusion experience or more so feature set of it, but it's not required. And that I think is one of the biggest kind of aspects of it. So what are the first for the beginners? You know, a lot of people ask, well, I can only use Fusion in a repeater or something like that. No, not at all. You can use Fusion in this regards here, which, as you see here, is basically a simplex operation, radio to radio. I used handheld pictures in this one, but it can be mobile to mobile. It could be however you want it to be. It can be simplex operation. Now, one of the things I have up here is I have this frequency, 1455625. Let me explain that real quick. A lot of people have asked and they said, hey, is there a fusion frequency? Is there a one that we can kind of go ahead and use for kind of like a calling channel, for kind of like a general channel? You're traveling through somewhere, you want to turn on the group mode, you want to be able to see who else is out there. Where's a common meeting place? Well, back in 2018, that question was posed to us a lot. And what happened was we kind of started talking about it, having good discussions on social media about it. And as time went on, things were going great, things were going good and everything like that. But then what happened is that idea started to catch fire. It really kind of took off. And what we started to notice is that people didn't just want to do it like in the US. They wanted to talk about how can we do it in other countries? How can we do it worldwide? And then all of a sudden, a lot of chatter started like saying, well, let's make a worldwide fusion frequency. And so when we looked at the different band plans and stuff like that on there, we kind of made a suggestion. Now, this is a suggestion, folks, okay? I know some people are saying, hey, you can't, oh, this and this, it doesn't work, or this is, why are we using 5625 as a splinter frequency? Well, we use it for a couple of reasons. One, because this fits into all the band plans as a suggestion. And two, Fusion is a narrower digital voice technology. It only uses 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth on there. So when you have that narrow compared to like a 20 or 25 kilohertz bandwidth for a normal FM signal, you can start to kind of put things a little bit more interlaced into one another. Now, from the US side of things, if you take a look, most of the band plans say in that region, it's for digital or experimental type usage. What more so is digital and experimenting and checking range and trying to be able to communicate with people long distance than being able to go ahead and do it in this way. So that's simplex. Now we have repeater or infrastructure kind of usage. And I show the pictures here of the DR2X and the DR1XFR on there. So you can use, and once again, I show handhelds, but you can use mobiles, whatever. You can use that repeater. And once again, those repeaters are standalone. It's not a situation where they have to be internet access. I mean, I'm trustee or owner of roughly about 13, 14 different repeaters, as I told numerous people. And in that regards, some of my repeaters are just standalone AMS. If you want to talk on analog, you can talk on analog. You want to talk on digital, you can talk on digital. It doesn't matter. The nice thing about our repeaters too is that they're small and compact. It's 19 inches wide rack mount. It's about 2 units, maybe 3 units there. I'd say roughly about 2 units. But the best thing about our repeaters is that from the US, for the North America ones, that you have an AC power supply built in, and then you also have the DC power supply capabilities on there. And the nice part about it is you can take this repeater and it's dual band right out of the box. It's either FM and, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. It's dual band in operation, meaning VHF, VHF, UHF, UHF, or unidirectional crossband. Receive on UHF, transmit VHF, or receive on VHF and transmit on UHF. It doesn't go back and forth like crossband, though. In addition, once again, where I was kind of jumped ahead there a little bit, it's also multi-mode, meaning it can be an FM repeater. It could be a digital only repeater, or it can be an AMS repeater where it's digital in, digital out, FM in, FM out, or, and we're one of the few that can actually do this, is you can go in on a digital mode and be forced to come out on analog, or go in on analog and be forced to come out on digital. Or you can go in AMS mode, meaning analog or digital, and be forced out FM, or analog and digital and forced out digital. So that's kind of the functionality. Once again, the versatility and flexibility of the repeater. Now, this next kind of step here is we have the advent of wires X. So now this is kind of one of the things we're saying you do need the internet in this case, but if you wanted to communicate with people, you can use a repeater without the internet. So this is actually, if you think about it, another layer, another component of the Fusion protocol. And in this case, what you're basically doing is you're taking and using a donor radio, which connects to the HRI 200 device, which then connects to your computer. Now, it does need to be a Windows computer, but what happens in that case is that your HRI 200 opens up the world of possibilities for you, because it's not just digital, okay? You can use an analog handheld into the donor radio with the HRI 200 and go in analog, or you can go in digital. You can cross over to different rooms. Meaning you can go into a room on analog, and if there's digital users, you can cross over and go to digital to them, and they can come back in digital and cross over to analog to you. In addition, the HRI 200 allows you to host a room, which we'll talk about in a little bit here in the presentation. But that's kind of that aspect of it. Now, as you see, once again, that versatility and flexibility, now what we're doing is we're saying, okay, wait a minute. You have these elements, repeater, standalone, you have wires X, standalone. Let's combine the two together. So now here you have a repeater connected to wires X. So now you can go into the repeater locally, and then wires X can still then send your signal out along the wires X highway, as we kind of say, and then that can connect to other wires X users on there. So now you can use the repeater locally, or you can use it in a connected linked fashion. And the best part about wires X, which is really nice, is that wires X can be steered from a user if it's set up that way. So even though you're connected to wires X, it does not necessarily mean that the repeater has to always go out wires X. You can shut off that room. You could shut off that ability on there. And then in turn, what you could do is just use the repeater locally. But hey, I want to connect to, let's say, the CQ America room, 21000, which we have for, sometimes we have the nets and stuff like that. Great. You can dial that up and connect it to there. Now, the next part that we have here is we're kind of gaining a couple different things here going on in this picture, which is kind of a unique picture. What we have, and we'll talk about a little bit more in depth later, is we have the ability to do IMRS, which is Internet Linked Multi-Site Repeater System. Now, don't let the word internet hang you up. You can do via IP, which once again, we'll explain IMRS in a little bit. But now what you do, and now what you can have, is a system of systems. Now you can have repeaters that are all connected together on a regular basis. And now you could feed wires X into one repeater. And now all those repeaters in the system are using wires X. So that's kind of it for the beginner. That's kind of your, hey, here's what Yaesu can do with System Fusion. Here's what wires X added to there can do with those, repeaters and the functionality. Now we're going to take a step up. We're going to go to the intermediate level. Now, what is the intermediate level? Well, the intermediate level is more so a situation in which you've had Fusion, you have wires X, you have things to do there, but now what you really kind of want to do is you want to expand, you want to break things off, you want to say, what is my limitations, or how can I get over, per se, these limitations here? So one of the things that we added was a thing called DGID. So first of all, I'm going to tell people out there, DGID is not a talk group. I've heard so many people say, oh, DGID is nothing more than a talk group. You're trying to be like DMR. No, wrong. Okay. And I'll explain the difference. When you have CTCSS tones, so let's focus on that. The charts there on the screen, CTCSS tones, we have 67 hertz through 254.1 hertz. When you are using CTCSS, you are basically saying, I want to select a tone that the other user I'm talking to obviously selects a tone, and we only hear one another. Basics 101. That's CTCSS in a nutshell. What happened, we found out, was a lot of people wanted to do the same thing with Fusion. They only wanted to be able to hear certain users. So what you did is you went along and we did DGID. Now, DGID does stand for Digital Group Identification. So it's, again, people are saying, oh, talk group, digital group, you're grouping people together, John, that's a talk group. No, because just like you can turn off CTCSS, you can turn off DGID. You cannot turn off a talk group. You always have to have a talk group assigned, regardless. So it's not a talk group. In addition, with DGID, just like CTCSS, you can have different setups and combinations. You can go in on one CTCSS tone and you can come out on another CTCSS tone. Same thing with DGID. You can go in on a certain CTC or DGID and you can receive on a different DGID. So it really kind of offers that level of flexibility, or you can just transmit with the DGID and receive 00 code, which I'll cover in a second. Now, one thing we found out about DGID is and kind of the Fusion system in general, is it's open. And what I mean by open is not only is the protocol open, but the standards and setting up for setting things up in general is open. Meaning we don't have a hard fast, you got to use this DGID. We don't have a hard and fast saying, okay, if you want to, this repeater here is repeater A, so we need to have you use DGID 10, and this repeater is B, so we have to have it. No, that is all you as the end user, the customer, how you want to use those radios on there and those DGIDs on there. But we give you this little tool, which we see on the screen here, is people said, well, how do I know what DGID to use? Because there's DGIDs 00, which is open squelch, no DGID at all. And then there's 01 through 99. And people say, well, what of the 99 do I use? So we said, take a look at your CTCSS plan. And if you see your CTCSS plan, the CTCSS plan, it's not the standard EIA 38 tones as you normally have on here. So what you do, though, is you start assigning the CTCSS tone. So 67 hertz is first tone, 100 hertz is the 13th tone, 169 is the 30th tone, et cetera, right? So what you do is you say, okay, if 67 hertz is the first CTCSS tone, guess what I'm going to say? I'm going to go ahead and say I'm using DGID 1. Well, if you're using 100 hertz, that's the 13th tone, so use DGID 13, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you're going to say, John, there's not 99 CTCSS tones. That's correct. There's not. So what that allows you to do as that user is when you need to select other DGID tones for other purposes or something like that, you have that flexibility. And I will explain how that comes into play in a little bit here. All right, so what is DGID, like I said? So as our example here, we have user A and user B, the guy in the red and the guy in the blue. And they're talking to one another, and they're using DGID 1. So A and B are only going to hear each other because they're both transmitting and receiving DGID 1. Now we have user C, the person in the red, and they're using DGID 2. All righty? They're using 2. So C is not going to hear A and B because A and B are using 1 and user C is on 2. And then if C tries to talk, A and B will not hear them because they're using 2 and A and B are using 1. Now, you have to share the frequency. It's just like analog. You have to share the frequency. One can't talk over the other or anything like that. So you do have to share the frequency in that regard. But you're not going to hear, if you're user C, you're not going to hear A and B in this case. But as you see, if user C changes their DGID to 00, now they will be able to hear A and B. But if they try talking, A and B is still not going to hear them because they're using DGID 1. So once again, that is like in essence a talk, not a talk group, but a DGID is a group of people you want to communicate, not a talk group. And like I said, I can see how some people want to say it's a talk group, but once again, user C is not using any DGID at all. If A and B wanted to go to 00, they would be open to being able to hear one another. Or even more so, you can go ahead and say, okay, I want to transmit 1 because maybe we have other people in the group who are transmitting or receiving with DGID 1, but we want to open up on C, or user C is using 00, so A and B want to receive with 00, if that makes sense. Okay, once again, very flexible in that case. So let's dive into the HRI 200 a little bit more. So the HRI 200 is basically a device. It's a box, for sake of a better term. It was born out of our HRI 100, which was our Wires 2 system, which actually was ahead of its time for internet linking. Okay, what it did was you connected together. It used dial-up internet for the most part and allowed you to create groups and people with DTMF ID codes. What we did is we took that same principle, because Wires, believe it or not, was actually created in our office in California. But what we did is we said, Wires X, why does it have to be just analog? Let's add a digital component on top of Wires X. So what happened is now you have analog and you have digital users in here. So in that case, as you see on the display here, you have to do some setup. Okay, you have to have a computer. You have to go ahead and you have to open up some UDP ports. You have to have a global non-NATed IP address and all those things on there. But in turn, what ends up happening in that case is now you're able to have an analog via RF. You're able to have digital via RF. You're able to host a room. You're able to go ahead and you're able to do connections and node to node. Now, if you've seen my presentations all the way back to 2017, you'll hear me say and use the example of how can I describe what Wires X is set up in the fashion is, and it's set up in 2 fashions. One, it's set up in a kind of a like an instant message or an instant communication setup that's the node to node, or it's set up into like a room, like a chat group. Okay, and I've made the example to AOL back in all those days, where if I want to talk to, let's say my dad and I want to talk to one another, we can connect our nodes 1 to 1, and no one is going to hear us communicate with one another because we're not in a room or nothing, unless they're actually hearing us go through a repeater or via RF. Now, if we want to go ahead and connect into a room, now I have my own room that I host here in Wisconsin. We at Yaesu, we have 2 rooms. We have CQ America 2100, and we have CQ America Digi, which is 21003. That's where you can connect into that room. And now you can talk to groups of different people, everybody that's connecting in there. In addition, people have asked and they said, well, how do I do the nomenclature? Because when it comes to a Wires X device, your call sign is what will show up on the Wires X network, but there's enough room to put a dash on there. So what we did is we kind of said, hey, let's do it. So we said, put an ND after your call sign if it's simplex and running low power. And that's usually the default when you get a Wires X ID issued to you. If you're going to be running a gateway, so we say put GW. Now, what a gateway means is I'm running a simplex node, but I'm running it on high power, or I'm feeding a repeater over the air. That's when we say use the word GW on there, or the and I say abbreviation GW. Now, use RP or RPT, depending on the length of your call sign, for a repeater. And this means when your HRI 200 is directly physically connected to a repeater, not going over the air like with a gateway. By the way, that's the other nice part about our technology. You can feed nodes and repeaters and groups over the air. Unlike other technologies where you have to have a physical internet connection to that repeater, you don't. And there are numerous Wires X users that are out there that have a repeater on a nice high mountaintop somewhere, or they have it in a nice location. I have mine set up that way up in northern Wisconsin. I have it on a nice site. It's really great. There is internet in the building, but it's not my internet, and that just costs too much to put my own internet in there. So I simply have it at a house, and then that feeds it over the air to the repeater, and then Wires X takes place in that way. Now, when you're talking PDN, which we'll get to here in a moment, that stands for personal digital node. Now, what PDN did is it offered a level of abilities to eliminate the HRI 200 from the need to be on Wires X. So, quick kind of look at Wires X here. You can have a node to node configuration. Once again, node 1 to node 2, that kind of thing. And in addition, it could be analog to digital, or digital to digital, or analog to analog, however you wanted to have it set up. The next way we talked about here, like I said, was a room. You have one person going in on their Wires X node, which is connected to a room. And while that person is talking, it is feeding that room, and then is going out to all the other people. Now, one thing that makes Wires X different than all these other types of connection modes out there is that Wires X is a centralized, decentralized system. And what I mean by that is that when you turn on Wires X for the first time, you're going to go ahead and register to the Wires X server. It's going to say, hey, this is node N9UPC DTMF ID number, this and this and this. Can I go on the Wires X network? And then we'll come back and we'll say, yes, you can, or no, you can't, if there's something wrong, if there's something not registered or something not valid. Then once I'm into the Wires X network, the server, I can pick any of the nodes or the rooms I want to connect to. When I do that, I am not going through a server anymore. I am actually going and connecting directly to whoever is hosting the room at their HRI 200. So for an example, if I'm using my room here in Wisconsin and you connect to my room in Wisconsin, it is literally going from your IP address to my IP address directly. It's not passing through any servers. It's not doing anything like that. That is kind of a better way, because now that is the more pure and direct kind of setup, instead of going up to a server and then getting reflected down. And if there's server issues or stuff like that, no, as long as your HRI 200 is turned on and your room is active in your HRI 200 and you connect to that room in that HRI 200, guess what? You are doing a direct connection. Now, let's talk about the PDN mode here real quick, or the HRI combo modes. So on the picture here, you see there's the SCU39 cable, the SCU40 cable. In those situations and stuff, you can then take the FTM 400, the FTM 300, and yes, the no longer production FTM 100 if you still have it. Use the cables, or I should back up, the FT2 and the FT3 also. But you could take the SCU40 cables for the mobiles, or you could take the SCU39 cables for the portables, connect them to your laptop, connect them to your computer at home, whatever you're running your Wires X software on, and then be able to use those devices in a couple different manners. So the first manner is going to be what we talk about is PDN. So that's personal digital node. Notice personal digital node. Digital, think of digital in there as saying it's digital only. When you are using it, you have two options. You have direct or you have access point. In this case, looking at the screen here, we're using it in direct. What that basically is doing then is it's saying, hey, here's the deal. You're taking and going to be using your radio as per se, a giant speaker microphone. And in that speaker microphone, then what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to talk in and go down to the Wires X network. And when someone talks to you on the Wires X network, you're going to be able to hear it through your handheld. So it's like almost like a giant speakerphone. Alrighty. A speaker microphone. But once again, PDN stands for personal digital. So what's going to happen in that case is that you're going to be using it in a digital format. Now what we have is PDN access point. Now access point kind of states it there. It's an access point. What you can do is you can take another Fusion radio and via RF over the air, talk in to that radio being used as a PDN. And in turn, now you can go via RF, or if you're close by next to the computers, you can see you could still use it as a speaker microphone to talk down Wires X. The biggest thing to remember, though, and this is where we get a lot of questions on there, is that it's digital only. So if you're on Wires X, you can only connect to something that has the icon for the room that says DIG, the little box will say DIG in it. Or if you're connecting to a node, it has to have the letter D in it. So now we come to HRI mode. So what's the big difference between HRI mode and PDN mode? Well, HRI mode is part of PDN, but what happens in this case is now your radio can produce a digital and analog stream going into the Wires X network. Notice I said in because it's not going out via RF. Okay, it's going to be going into the network. And that's where you need the cables, and that's where you need the cable set up correctly, because what's happening is when you're using that microphone on the mobile, or whether you're using that handheld with the push to talk button, those two cables coming out, the one going to your USB and the one going into your sound card, is what creates those two streams. The USB cable is going to be digital. The audio cables going into your microphone and speaker jack on your computer, that's going to be the analog. And I'm going to tell you, you're doing a disservice if you're using HRI going into a mixed mode room, meaning analog and digital, and not using the analog cables. Because if there's analog users in there, what's going to happen is when you talk, the radios will key up, but it's going to be a dead key because you are not producing that analog stream. But as you see direct, once again, that's speaker microphone fashion. Now, when we talk about HRI mode, what we're talking about now is very similar an access point now, but what's happening is that when you are going into there, you're no longer using the speaker microphone. What you're doing is you're going in only via RF, and you have to use another fusion radio and digital. Even though that radio is still producing the digital and analog stream, you still have to go into it in a digital RF format. All right, now that was the intermediate, and I know it seems like a lot. Now we're going to talk about the advanced side here. So what are the advanced aspects of Yaesu System Fusion? Comes into one of our repeater setup. And this is what we call our IMRS board. All righty. Now, where did IMRS come from, I should say? Where was it birthed out of? Well, what happened is that when you wanted to connect or digitally link Yaesu repeaters together, you had to use a HRI 200 Wires X setup for it at that time. There was no PDN out there, okay? So what happened was a lot of people said, oh, man, so if I have two repeaters at the same site and I want to be able to link them together, you're telling me I have to have two HRI 200 setups, and I have to have two donor radios, or I have to have two of them connected to the repeaters just so I can make a link or a bridge. And we said, yeah, unfortunately, yes, because here's a little bit of history. HRI 200s were never initially allowed to connect to a repeater. It wasn't until 2014, Christmas of 2014, we released the firmware based on customer request, okay, to say, hey, can we use the Wires X HRI 200 setup to link our repeaters together? So that's where that kind of came into play. All right. Now what ended up happening is people said, I don't have the internet. I just want to be able to link my VHF to VHF or VHF to UHF, whatever the combo is, in true digital voice format. I want to, both repeaters are in digital. I want to link them together. What can I do? Well, that's where IMRS comes into play. Like I said, it says internet linked multi-site repeater system. I want you to change the word internet linked, and I want you to change it to IP. Okay. And the reason I say it's IP is because if you see on that board, it's a small little board. It's about a little bit bigger than a credit card. Okay. When you put that into the repeater, all you need is off of that Ethernet port, which is that giant kind of silver thing in the corner there. All you have is that's an Ethernet cable. All you need to do it is run it into like a router or switch or something. And then that switch can then run into the other repeater. And all you simply do is you go into the repeater and you tell it the IP address that it needs to look for. Okay. So here's a picture of it. You set up your DGIDs, okay? So it's like sort of CTCSS steering. Now, some of you are going to understand what CTCSS steering is, especially if you maybe were in public safety, like two-way radio techs and stuff like that. CTCSS steering used to be super huge, okay? Especially like mobile repeaters and stuff, And I bring this up because that's kind of what you're doing is you're choosing a different DGID, which is sort of like the CTCSS digital. And then as you see on the right-hand side, the screen here, which is the IP address setup that you do in the repeater. So you say, hey, anytime someone is going to use DGID 90, for an example here, it's going to go ahead and connect to the other repeaters in my group that are all connected together that are using DGID 90. And then, like, say, for example, DGID 99. Well, guess what? That's going to go ahead and connect all the repeaters in the group because all the repeaters have DGID 99. So this is where you start to kind of come into play. And I'm just going to do a shameless plug here real quick. We're going to be holding a webinar on DGID and IMRS technology very quickly here within probably the next 30 days. So this will kind of be more in depth and it kind of gives you kind of a more explanation on there. So in this regards, though, when you're using DGIDs, it's nice because you can actually set it up that you can have a local DGID. That means it's not going to go out over the IMRS network at all. I just want to talk locally to Bill on our local repeater. So me and Bill are going to, in this case, use DGID 1. And when we're using DGID 1, hey, me and Bill are just talking locally. But if I want to go out to different groups here, that's when I would go ahead and set up my repeater to be the different DGIDs or groups in there. So in that case, what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, 90, I only wanted to go out to select repeaters. 99, I wanted to go out to all the repeaters. And I have a graph here that kind of explains it a little bit more here. So follow with me. We have 4 repeaters. Repeater 1, 2, 3, and 4, respective DGID 1, 2, 3, and 4. Everybody's communicating on their own, on their respective repeaters using the DGID. So 1 is only on repeater 1 and 2 is only on repeater 2. Now, what we do is we set up these DGID groupings. So as you take a look here, I set up the DGID group 10, so DGID 10. Now what's going to happen is that if you're on repeater 1 or you're on repeater 2 and you're using DGID 10, it's instantly going to make a connection between repeater 1 and repeater 2, because that's all the repeaters that are only using DGID 10. They're not using any, none of the others are using DGID 10. Okay. DGID 20 is going to be between repeaters 3 and 4. So once again, on repeater 3 or repeater 4, if one of the users use DGID 20, guess what's going to happen? It's now going to go and connect only 3 and 4 together. Now, same thing for DGID 30. DGID 30 now, I expanded it out. I said 1, 3, and 4. I still want to leave 2 on its own. I don't want 2 connected on DGID 30. So what ends up happening is that you're going to then take and you're going to key up on DGID 30, once again, on any of those repeaters that have that DGID connected, and boom, they're going to connect to one another. Now, you can have, and this is what I have, and this is what I suggest people when they're laying out a DGID system. I tell people use DGID 99 as it all connect. And maybe you might be connecting 4 repeaters here. You might be connecting 10, 20, who knows how many you have. But the reason I say that is because if you're on DGID 0 and I key up and I'm not keying up the repeater, if I switch over to DGID 99 on any of these repeaters now I would know, hey, guess what? 99 is connecting all 4 of these repeaters together. And I can say, hi, this is N9 UPC on repeater 1 using DGID 99, and I'm listening. Okay, great. So then maybe someone replies back to me and he's on repeater 4. Now what he could do is he can go ahead and he could say, hey, John, here I'm blah, 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 blah. Hey, I'm on repeater 4. Instead of tying up all the repeaters, if you want to, or maybe you guys want to talk on the repeaters, burn some final time, right? But maybe if you want to go, you can then say, hey, can you move over to DGID 30? Because we know 30 connects 1 and 4, and it also connects 3. But we know, and now what we can do is we could take that, instead of connecting all the repeaters, we can hone in and we can go just down to those few 1. Okay. Now here's the best part about it. This is what I really like. Yes, you need IP connectivity. That's why I say get rid of the word internet, but IP connectivity. But guess what? I don't need a server. Okay. I don't have to have the repeater have anything built into it other than this LAN card. Okay. And if I have repeaters in a rack, which I do, a couple of my repeaters, I have a VHF and a UHF repeater together, right? The reason I have both of those at that site is because UHF is going to give me different coverage than VHF. VHF is going to give me more wide range, going to get me into some of the valleys that the UHF can, where with the UHF, where it's near, I got great city penetration. So guess what I can do now? I don't need to have the internet. I don't need to connect to servers. I don't need to have anything in there. All I'm doing is doing that simple direct connection right at the repeater site there. So I need Ethernet cables and a small switch. Okay, fine. I'll go to Micro Center or go to Best Buy and spend 20 bucks. Okay, 30 bucks. All righty. And then I have that connectivity on there. That's the great part about it. Now, in addition to there, I'm going to call on, hey, all you ham wham guys, Arden, Mesh, all those kind of things like that. Guess what? This runs great. I've done some tests and I've done hops after hops. Let me tell you something. Had my repeater out at a site, had it connected to a mesh network. Okay. That Ubiquity dish pointed down to the house where I had the wires X node pointing at. That then created that mesh pipeline there. I went into one router and then I routed it in my house to another router, which then went along because I could, and I'm a ham, right? Then in my house, I went along from a mesh point to another mesh point. And then I went from that mesh point into a router, which then it was actually connected to the internet, and using a VPN tunnel, I went and connected it back down to my other place that has the other repeater set up. And then I connected it into there. And guess what? Hop on mesh, hop on router, hop on mesh, hop on router through the actual internet. And guess what? It works. Because all you simply need to do is you need to say, hey, I need to go from IP address A to IP address B. And that's it. So up and coming items. Let's talk about some up and coming items here. So one of the things that we are starting the Yes Network. If you're not familiar with Yes, it stands for Yaesu Education System on there. It can be found. I've seen some questions on there. Hey, where can I find some of these PowerPoints or presentations on there? What about webinars? When we do a webinar, we do it live. And once the webinar is completed, we do record it. And then once we do that recording, then we put it up on our YouTube channel, Yaesu USA Official. You can view past webinars there. And we have a whole catalog that are out there right now. We have one from a couple years ago, explains Wires X, another one talks about DGID, talks about the DR2X, setting up the repeater, talks about, all these kind of aspects and things on there for all the different educational materials that are out there. So I know I'm running short on time here, so I'm going to kind of look through some of the questions here. So bear with me. No, I'm not the baseball player, because if I was, I would be sitting back and playing with radios. Some people asked, what about the FTM 400 has a bigger screen? That's a touch screen. We do still, we like that screen. We are keeping it. That's why we have the FTM 400 still around, because a lot of people like the touch screen. They like the bigger screen. They like the bigger functionality on there. One person asked, what is the general fusion frequency again? 145.5625. Now, you may have to change the steps in your radios from 5 kilohertz to 6.25 kilohertz, but it's not that hard to do. Very simple on there. In addition, I'm going to tell you this. In addition to our webinars that we have, I suggest going ahead, if you're on social media like Facebook, check out our Yaesu USA Official Facebook group and our Yaesu System Fusion Official Facebook group. There's a lot of Fusion and Yaesu groups out on Facebook that are not the official ones. They don't have the correct information. Some of them are more anti-fusion than actual fusion. But with that, you can go to our official groups or go to SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Podcast, iTunes Podcast. We have a podcast we do called the Lunch and Learn, and it's not just fusion, it's all things Yaesu. It's about 15 little minute podcast episodes. Yeah, it's me just blabbering on, but kind of gives you food for thought. The reason I bring it up here is because we talk about how to change to the 6.25 step. When should you ID with your call? I heard conflicting answers. Okay, that's a question that comes up really good. Our Fusion protocol has the call sign embedded into the protocol. Okay, so that's why every time once you put your call sign in to that radio, every single time you transmit in digital, you are going to be going ahead and transmitting your call sign. Now, this is where it gets that gray area, because if you are truly Fusion, you are going to be transmitting your call sign. And much like Packet and other digital voice modes, you don't need to stop doing it and ID. You don't need to be doing FT8 stop and get on the radio and say N9UPC. No, you don't. Same thing with Packet, all that. If your call sign's embedded, it is, and mind you, Fusion's an amateur protocol, so it actually does allow you to actually enter your call sign. Once again, it's not an ID or something like that on there. It's your actual call sign. So it does go out. Now, the reason I say that is because if you are in a room that has analog users, your ID is not going to come out on there. Okay. If you're doing some of this weird cross moding stuff like that to other digital modes, guess what? Other digital modes like DMR and P25 and NextGen and stuff, those are all numerical things. Your ID does not cross over. Okay. The FCC does not consider that a legal identification. So therefore, we say a good rule of thumb in practice is that unless you are 100% certain that you're using and talking to someone in Fusion and it's not going out to any other modes or stuff, you technically don't have to ID because your call sign is in that header. However, a good rule of thumb is to practice proper call sign identification at the 10-minute marks, or if you're not in the US, the other formats on there. Yeah, so here's a good question. Is there a way that a user on DGID2 can tell that there's a user or conversation in progress on DGID1? Yes, good question. Thank you. With that, even though you have different DGIDs, it's kind of like CTCSS. You'll see the signal light bar light up on there. And if you hit the monitor button, you'll be able to hear it like on analog. Same thing on Fusion. If you're on DGID2 and someone's on DGID1, your radio's not opening, but you'll see their call sign come across. And then if you hit the monitor button, you will actually hear that conversation on there. So good question on there. Let's see. So yes, Wires X is only on Windows platform right now. There's no intent or design to port it out to other platforms on there. So real quick, the question that also comes up here that was asked, this is, how does cross moding or going out to other modes impact or affect Wires X? Well, when you have a Wires X room set up, bridging is what we kind of call it, takes place. The problem with bridging is this. The other devices that are out there, like your hotspots and stuff like that, they aren't using the true Fusion protocol. It's a reversed protocol that was made for Fusion. Now, let me tell you something here on this. The Fusion protocol is 100% open. I don't know why it was reverse engineered. You can actually go get a white paper on Fusion, the Yaesu System Fusion protocol, and it will tell you everything, and you can build your own device. Wires X is a closed system. Now, why we have it as a closed system is because I think everybody can easily see how if it wasn't a closed system, and I know this happens with hotspots and other devices, I can tell you easily could see that you could turn and manipulate it into a private business network. And I know people that have done that with hotspot devices and stuff like that on there. We don't want that to happen. We want Wires X to be an amateur-based technology that's used worldwide. So therefore, that's why when you register, you have to enter call sign, you have to enter pertinent information, you have to prove who you are, and then that's when we grant the nodes on there. Now, the reason I say that is because you can only use a Yaesu device to access Wires X. So when this bridging occurs, these devices do not filter out bad bit error rates. What happens in that case, again, is that it takes, and our Yaesu radios have a bit error rate max of 3%. That means that in that whole digital transmission that's coming, and that whole digital transmission that's coming, up to 3% can be bad bits, and then the radio will still pass it. Once you hit the 3% mark, our radios will not pass that audio. So if someone's talking and you have a bad bit error rate, or they're in simplex, even you're too far from another user and that bit error rate goes 3%, you may see their call sign, but guess what? The radio's not going to decode the audio. Same thing with using these bridge technologies. If you have bad bit error rate, because these things are tunnels, okay? These hotspot devices and everything are tunnels. I've actually taken and done tests myself where I've had bit error rates. Those devices are passing bit error rates of 9%. So I'm going into the device at 9% of a bit error rate. And guess what? It's sending it out there. The other user on the other end, they're going ahead and their radio might show there's a signal, but nothing is being decoded. Nothing is coming out because guess what? The bit error rate is too high. So what tends to happen is that we get a lot of these calls lots of times in technical support. Fusion is horrible. It's no good. It's no good, blah, 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 blah. Well, really what it is, we'll ask, well, how are you using it? And I'm saying, well, I'm using it with the hotspot, or I'm using it in this situation scenario. Well, right away, we could tell that there's a bad bit error rate. You have a bad bit error rate. And we'll say, hey, can you use it on a Fusion repeater? Oh, yeah, Fusion repeater works great. Oh, can you use it on a Wires X node? Oh, yeah, the Wires X node works great. But when I'm using it with this device, I have bad, it cuts out, the audio is horrible and everything. Well, that's usually related to bad bit error rate. Um, Another quick question here, kind of trying to go through them real quick. I know I'm on a time schedule. How can you link a Fusion to an analog repeater using a link radio? Very simple. We do talk about it on our DR2X, and we have talked about it on some of our podcasts. I would suggest go and listen to that. But basically, you can on the back of all of our repeaters, you have a D sub 15 connector, which is a 3 rows of 5 type connector, and you have the 10-pin mini DIN connector. You can easily add an analog link radio to it, or if you're even in the same shack, you can actually wire the repeaters up directly. So it's really great out there. Really quick, I'm just kind of scrolling through here, kind of seeing something of the other things here. I know there's a lot of questions that have popped up here, and I'm trying to go through the big ones here. Real quick. One question asked, how about using Wires X commands with a different radio? So what we're talking about is remotely controlling your Wires X node. Go to our YouTube channel, Yaesu USA Official. Go ahead and take a look at the Wires X Part 3 webinar. So everything you wanted to know about Wires X, but we're afraid to ask, Part 3. In Part 3, it goes ahead and shows how you can use a radio and do basic, simple function commands and controls for the Wires X network. So here's what I want to go ahead and do is I want to go ahead and say, listen, here's the deal. Thank you for your time. Write down this here. I'll leave this up here real quick. Our website is yaesu.com. That's our full company one. If you want System Fusion related stuff, when we have a webinar coming up, we'll post that information on there. I know some people ask where I can sign up for it. Systemfusion.yaesu.com. Once again, systemfusion.yaesu.com. No www that anything, just systemfusion.yaesu.com. We will post on there other information too. If you're interested in purchasing a DR2X repeater or DR1XFR repeater, that program is still going on. Tell your friends. You can get the applications there. Visit our Facebook groups. And then once again, I don't have it up here. This is my email address. Try to get a lot of emails, especially after presentations. But we do offer club presentations. We do offer more trainings. One last thing, and I'll turn it back over to our forum moderator here. We are going to be starting a kind of a how do I say a Yes Network classes. So we're going to be starting some modular kind of based learning and that kind of thing on there, where each month we're going to be focusing on certain aspects of Fusion. These classes where we have a beta group that's already been selected. Yes, we do have a beta group on there. Some people have contacted. So what we're going to do is we're going to be giving a module. It's going to be on a weekend, and it's going to be a couple hours easily on there, but we're going to walk through some of the things. Allows you as a user, a club, a customer, whatever the case may be, however your aspect is, to say, hey, I'm going to get a little bit about the Fusion history. I'm also going to be able to get a little bit of information about this and this and this and this. And then what it's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to become knowledgeable on Fusion. So you don't have to go ahead and hear misinformation or disinformation on there. One recently we heard was Fusion was being discontinued. Nope. That was from someone who liked another digital mode and twisted words. No, these classes are going to be great. Sign up. I would suggest you there. Class size is going to be limited. I'm going to tell you that right now. Usually our webinars will do about 100 people on there, but class size is going to be a little bit more restricted because this is going to be an online interactive classes. So for example, when we get to the Wires X classes, we're going to be saying, hey, do you have PDN or do you have an HRI 200 or do you have access to one that day? Because we're going to be doing virtual hands-on. I know that's kind of a oxymoron, but yes, virtual kind of hands-on from there. So I want to go ahead and thank everybody. I see a lot of people are in the chat box there. Thank you very much. And 73 will catch everybody down the log, and Hamcation, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, John. Great presentation, and we appreciate you being here.